All right, so let's go ahead and get started with our Torah study. We'll be studying from Torah portion Teitzei, Devarim 21:10 to 25:19 is the Torah passages. Before we get started with the study, Devarim 8 verse 10 says, "So you'll eat and be satisfied, you will bless Adonai your God for the good land he has given you." So let's do that. Abba, we have eaten and we're satisfied. We thank you for the land. It's in Yeshua's name we thank you. Amen. And this was the readings we did. Versification difference we discussed when we were reading it. Here's the first verse of our portion, Teitzei. And here is from the English translation. It's from the ISR scriptures. So the next question comes up is this: according to the count of Rambam, there are dos ekis, number of mitzvot in this Torah portion, including some of the commands listed there. So you can see that we are in double digits of the commands. And so, unfortunately for the guessing of the answer here, all of these are also in double digits. So which one is it? Is it A 47, B 56, C 68, or D 74?
C.
B and C. What do you think? How many number of mitzvot are there?
B?
Okay, we'll see how that goes then.
I think it's one of those up there.
It's one of these four,
I agree.
but it is not A. But it's also not B. But it's also not C.
74.
74, yeah.
Whoa.
So there's more, of the mitzvot in the Torah, more than 10% come from this Torah portion. And here again are some of them. I do have all the mitzvot listed. You may, because there are 74, it takes, I do have them all here for reference if you want to discuss some of them.
I'm not going to discuss every single one.
Well, I can show them on the screen.
That's not what I said.
Say again?
That's not what I said. Chicken.
Chicken?
We got coffee.
We do have coffee, and it's Honduran coffee, so it's thumbs up. I think that.
You mean the order?
Hmm?
The order of the mother and father?
Well, that is discussing when you get to it's the order or the instructions. But in 21. It says something like, "Male will have a wayward and rebellious son who does not listen to the voice of his father and to the voice of his mother." So that's the order. It equates listening to the voice as adhering or rebelling against what they have told you to do. In other words, the voice tells you what the order is. So this is sort of a strange one listed here. Now this is not, I wouldn't say necessarily what the text says. Because the mitzvah here listed as the court must hang those stoned for blasphemy or idolatry. The text reads, "A man will have committed a sin whose judgment is death, and he shall be put to death. You shall hang him on a wooden beam." So I don't know that there's a dual command here to stone them and then hang them. If that makes sense. What we do see, we'll talk a bit more about later, that Torah of the wayward and rebellious son, and the passage that follows in 21:23, to not leave the body hanging on the tree overnight, or the wooden beam, as this particular Art Scroll translation reads.
Could actually be impaled.
Yeah, I mean, hanging on a beam, I think, could be the same thing as being impaled, perhaps, but it doesn't use the word impaled here, but it doesn't say how they're being hung on it either. Whether it was, being nailed to something or being hanged from it, like in the Old West.
Just being on a tree.
Yeah, being put, well,
They say wood because it says tree.
And it does. We do see the word eights in verse 23. Al ha'etz, upon the tree. Verse 4, assist in placing the load upon a neighbor's beast. The question kind of comes in, if you see that on Shabbat, do you help the donkey that has fallen over get up again?
Yes.
It kind of depends on your view of how it should be interpreted. As we talked about before, in the Qumran sect of Judaism, the answer would have been no, because the beast wouldn't be out working if it had fallen, and wouldn't have fallen over had it not been working. Therefore, it would be breaking Shabbat if you do to raise it up out of the ditch. The text doesn't actually, the mitzvah here reads, placing the load upon a neighbor's beast, but it doesn't actually say that in the text. It only reads the one above it, do not leave a beast that has fallen down beneath its burden. Well, it just says, you shall not see the donkey of your brother or his ox falling on the road and hide yourself from them. You shall surely raise with them, or raise it with them. And what Yeshua said is that, yes, you would definitely raise a donkey or an ox who's fallen down in a ditch, even if it was Shabbat. But that would have not been the practice of all of Judaism in the first century of Common Era.
And the donkey, but the donkey, the guy could have been coming back from the laundry. Not
Yeah.
necessarily working.
Not necessarily working. So, yeah.
It's a more life or death situation, with the exception for.
Yeah, it's showing compassion to the animal.
It's not the donkey's fault
not
that he's
donkey's fault,
working
yeah.
on Sabbath. It's whoever his owner is.
Right. You also, someone would look at it and say, when it says you shouldn't hide your, not hide your eyes from it, is
Not look the other way.
just look the other way, or the, you can't hide yourself is simply saying you've got to take action on it. Yeah. As if it wasn't happening. So what about 22:5? And there's a next slide also has the same thing. Women are not to wear a man's clothing or adornments. And the alternative, men are not to wear a woman's or adornments. What is considered women's clothing?
Clothing that is specific by society standards designated as female. Like, which is why you can wear pants and a kilt is still considered a man's garment. Because it's a societal standard. You're not trying to hide your identity as male or female,
Yes.
which is what the LGBTQ community intends to do.
And typically those who call a kilt a skirt end up with a broken nose.
Though that is actually what it translates to.
Yeah, well, in that case, you could call a robe woman's.
And actually, at the time, both men and women wore robes.
At the time, yeah. I mean, someone could say, yeah, I think that's like a dress. Talking about the kilt comparison. Yeah, that's like a dress. So,
Well, even today,
In
men-
medieval times, they were actually called dresses.
the a robe can still be worn today by a male. I mean, that's what
well, I'm not talking about like a
king,
bathrobe or something.
well, kings wear.
Something we would wear out in public.
That's what
In England?
yeah, when the kings when Charles has a robe, for example, he would wear when that was coronation.
That's what people who would call the kilt that is a woman's apparel is the same one we would call that robe and woman's apparel. That's what I'm saying. I'm not making a judgment on either way. I think if you do it to disguise yourself as a man or a woman,
Right.
that is definitely wrong.
That's what, yeah. And that's really what is, I think, being discussed here is to not attempt to portray yourself as something you're not.
Yeah.
What
You're lying to yourself and you're lying to the one who made you.
And everyone around you. Until you take it off, then everybody knows. And nobody wants that.
well, in history there has been apparently some disputing about these passages where it says here's a reference to a Talmudic discussion and interpretation that says, the verse forbids a woman to wear male attire only with the intent to commit immoral behavior. The question of whether it is forbidden to wear garments of the opposite sex without intent to commit immoral behavior is a matter of dispute. Rashi is of the opinion that it is permitted.
Like if you're wearing it as a disguise so that you don't get killed, it was a common tactic.
Throughout every culture.
They did that.
Like there was a Scottish king that dressed up in women's clothes as so people that people hunting him down would ignore him, so he would not die.
She covered them all instead of writing. And so it could have been more.
No, she specifically said she putting with the, she covered them up with
There's also,
the thing.
and there's also when you're playing a character, you are not saying you are this person, you're just pretending in order to tell a story, like with acting. And then,
So how would you, today, with the LGBTQ movement,
More letters on that now.
AAIP2,
They're saying it'll be the whole alphabet.
would you consider that to be more on the immoral side, or?
yeah, because they're trying to create ambiguity in order to follow their own sexual desires instead of nature, instead of what's natural.
It would seem that would fall into the, even if it's only to prohibit immoral behavior, it does seem that this fits that description. They fit that description in this case. 22, 6, and 7 together, these are, it's really the, I guess taken together, this is considered the least of the mitzvot in the Torah. In terms of when Yeshua talked about the least of the commandments, it's thought to be this is the least of the commandments. To not take the mother bird with the young and to release the mother bird before taking the nest. In other words, not take them both together.
Yeah, because that's a really easy way to wipe out an entire species.
What there was a gentleman that was I forget the term he used, but he was basically in modern times, maybe a couple of years ago, he was going through and attempting to do all the mitzvot he could in a year. And in order to fulfill these mitzvot, he found a person who would let him go into a upper floor of an apartment where a bird's nest was within range of the window, and so reach out and take the egg, leave the mother there, so you could fulfill that mitzvah to do that.
Yeah, but it's also not, you don't have to do that either. Just leave it there.
Yeah.
You don't have to take it.
Well, he wanted to not just not disobey it, but actually do it so it comes that way. So he made the effort to take the eggs. I guess you could probably, in a sense, well, couldn't you do that with chickens too?
I was gonna say, like chickens and their eggs.
So in the third aliyah of our reading, the question that, or the comment that Jim was making is reference to chapter 22, verse 9. If you have your Bibles handy, just let's check it out and see how yours reads there, because most of them read not quite right. 22, verse 9.
Tell your version before you would, before you say those things.
The Jewish Bible is, you are not to sow two kinds of seed between your rows of vines. If you do, both the two harvested crops and the yield from the vines must be forfeited.
Forfeited. That's a little closer translation.
Yeah, a lot of translations read something like,
Defiled.
yeah, that will be defiled, or, yeah. What's the word used there for that is tikdash, tav Kuf Dalet Shin. But recognize that the root word of Pikdash is Kadash, right? Kadash is, he says, Kadosh is derived from that word. And what Rashi said about that is that Kadash he says Kadosh denotes being set apart, be it in a positive or negative sense. The way this translation reads says, "You shall not sow your vineyard with a mixture, lest you set apart the growth of the seed that you plant and the produce of the vineyard." So when you set it apart, essentially it's being forfeit because you can't keep it. What the text note here also says that the root word Kadash is used in Isaiah 65:5 for being set apart in a negative sense. So the idea is that it is set apart. It might not be for the good purpose. You basically forfeit that.
Not the same as being set apart to take to the temple.
No, I don't know, but it doesn't say what you're supposed to do with it if you do.
Destroy it. You want to destroy it.
Again, it doesn't say what you're supposed to do with it.
I think the reason why is, like, there might be two reasons. One might be that there might be accidental cross-pollination that could damage one or both types of plants.
Mhm.
The other might be that the other plants are taking nutrients away from, nutrients out of the ground and away from the grapes, thereby making them less.
Kind of like one of those things,
Acting
Don't
similar
take
to
it.
children.
about the mother's milk.
Yeah. Don't boil the kids' mother milk.
Yeah.
I
We're
think
told not to do it.
that's a third possibility.
Mhm.
Well, the mother's milk thing was specifically a pagan worship ritual.
Yeah.
It is,
Still, I mean,
So,
we're not told
mix-
the reason.
Yeah.
So we're left to guess.
Here's a commentary on it. It says, "You shall not sow your vineyard with a mixture." Implies that the mixture, i.e. two species, is being sown along with sowing the vineyard, planting grape seeds. Thus, the verse forbids sowing grapes with any two other species of grain or vegetables. Rashi uses wheat and barley as an example. And the verse meant that it is forbidden to sow even a single other species along with grapes. It would have said, "You shall not sow a mixture in your vineyard." That's according to, that's essentially quoting what Rashi said. The verse in Leviticus or Vayikra 19:19, "You shall not sow your field with mixed seed," forbids sowing with any combination of species, even if grapes are not included. Ours adds an additional prohibition to a combination which includes grape seeds.
It doesn't say anything about anything else but grapes.
What's that?
Does it say that's about all crops or just about grapes?
Well, 19:19 in Leviticus says, "Not sow your field with mixed seed." This one says, "You shall not sow your vineyard with a mixture, lest you set the growth of the seed you plant with the produce of the vineyard."
Why they throw vineyard in there? It's talking about other crops. Sounds to me like,
I think I
on the
specified
surface, it sounds to me
because
like
of
you can
vineyard-
mix other crops, but you can't mix the other crops with grapes.
Well, I think in Leviticus 19:19, it's not to mix it, to not sow your field with mixed seed. In other words,
Yeah,
we can't,
Two kinds of grapes.
Yeah,
but then it goes on to specify about grapes.
not in Leviticus 19:19.
Oh, that's in somewhere else. It's not there.
It's here. The grapes are here in this passage. In Devarim 22:9, it uses the term vineyard, which would, I think, imply grapes.
I think it might actually be because of different harvest seasons.
Nutrients, the harvest seasons, and the cross pollination. Because like if you stick like different kinds of like if you stick watermelon and cantaloupe next to each other, they will cross pollinate, and you really don't want that because the seeds aren't viable.
It's almost like making a GMO.
Oh, no.
Elvis. Because it's modified.
No, it's like making a meal.
Hybrid.
It's like crossing your chicken grapes.
The horses and the donkeys.
GMO is modified. It's what-
Genetically modified.
Genetically modified. So mess with the DNA, not like different plants.
Because you can't,
Buying different plants.
you can't, you don't have the seeds. It's kind of hard to reproduce sometimes.
I mean, because like this is one of those things that you could probably actually experiment with that, just to see what happens. Like,
Well, it says not to do it.
like scientists could actually go out of their way to do this to see what happens. Like you ask like grape farmers, why do you have grapes by themselves?
And that's how you get pandemics.
Well, grapes and grains or not.
Basic.
Well, when you think about it, I mean, mixing, it's not going to harm. It's not, if you plant barley next to a vineyard, it's not going to harm the grape in the sense it's not going to turn the grape into barley.
Right.
So I kind of think
It may
that,
it may have more to do with pulling the nutrient, like the barley, stealing the nutrients from the grapes.
or vice versa.
Well, to harvest barley, you cut it down. To harvest grapes, you pluck them from the vine. So you
So
might
it's
accidentally
dangerous.
cut the grapes down while you're harvesting the barley.
Ultimately,
Most of the time when you do see grapes anywhere mixed with stuff, it's usually trees.
'Cause they can
And
go
even
on-
then, it's usually by itself in the center
what are you talking
on
about?
a
You're talking
thing.
about natural growth of those,
Yeah.
not,
Yeah, we have,
you don't really plant barley in trees in
the,
forests.
we have
Those are usually aggressive.
we have the wild grapes
Over on the same.
that are growing. It's good for jams and for wine or something. It's not good for eating. It's just,
Is a type of wild grape.
it's Oklahoma.
Would it prohibit planting two different types of grapes in a vineyard?
Because they're so grapes. They're just different flavor.
They're not like, net where they twine all together and spread out. They're just root spread out and they don't have their own individual. And they don't need.
And you just get a new type of grape to cross pollinate.
You know,
I think it's like a certain amount of space that you need, because like corn, you can't have it like 4 miles away from the other corn, because then it will cross pollinate.
Yeah, and if you have popcorn, corn,
The strongest.
anything within 4 miles is going to turn into popcorn.
I'm not sure how far this means that your vineyard has to be from another crop. But it would seem to be advising specialization in either crops, particular kind of crop, versus trying to do both vineyard and crops.
And
Like the best farming practices have different sections. It's just one plant, another section is one plant, and it just keeps going like that.
I'm wondering if the roots of the crop would interfere with the roots of the water, reaching down to the water to interfere with the grains.
grains usually go about yay deep,
Like even
and then
here in the
grapes
US, I
go
don't think I've ever
down.
seen anybody who makes other crops in grapevines.
Right. This commentary may give some light onto why some translations have it read as, or take the cue from what this is saying about why translations might render that as being defiled. Thank you for all that help. It says, this is to be understood as Targum Onkelos renders it as become impure. Thus, anything which is set off limits to a person, whether it's for a praiseworthy reason, for instance, that which is holy, or whether it's for discredit, for instance, that which is prohibited, forms the word kadosh can apply to it. Like in the verse, "Do not approach me, for I have put you off limits." Let's see the reference there, but Isaiah 65:5. That's what the reference is. So, do not work animals of different species together, which the specifics of this were what? Do not plow with an ox and a donkey together.
Yeah, that's quite easy. Strength of an ox and strength of a donkey is quite great. Same with the endurance of the animals and speed.
There's also the temperament.
But I'm not sure that's obvious.
There's many reasons.
There can be reasons given for it, but look at the type of mitzvah it is. There's no reason given, and it's not necessarily obvious.
When there's no reason given, all best you can do is do your best guess at why, if you're trying to find out why.
Yeah.
It still remains, no matter if you find out why or not, you do look at that.
Right. And this a phrase you can term that's been termed for this passage is to be unequally yoked. I mean, you look at that literally. I mean, are an ox and donkey the same height?
No.
If they're on one yoke, would it work? Do you fit them together in there? I mean, pretty hard to get them to.
Yeah.
The only way you could even attempt to do it
might be
is
crop that right
one in
line that
front
runs
and
like
the other
this.
behind. And even then,
I think that drunk guy
I think it's off.
plowed.
I don't think we should be guessing as to what it is, but I think it's a cruelty to the animal, to the weaker animal.
He dragged along. So. Next one is sha'anetz, a cloth woven of wool and linen together. And this, I think there's at least one of the places where it lists in the same passage wool and linen together. But in practicality, what could have been woven, what kind of cloth could have been woven together when the Torah was written? Or at least in that area where Moshe was when he wrote it. Well, it wasn't rayon, right?
Wool.
It could only have been wool and linen with only two that could have been used because Cotton was available, but it had not been yet exported from India to the Near East. And
What
so,
about linseed oil?
like what?
Linseed. Is that the right one?
Linseed is an oil, not really a cloth.
No,
I'm
that's
aware of.
not the one thing I'm thinking.
Well,
Flax.
well, yes, flax is where you get linen from. So it's grown.
Yeah.
I actually watched a video at one point about this, and like when this Catholic guy trying to explain what he thinks it's about, and he thinks it's about separating plants and animals.
It could be because one is a product of a plant.
As a reflection of the original first 6 days.
But at the same time, we must understand that there's
It's a good theory
in Torah, is there a time when wool and linen are mixed together?
on the priestly garments.
Yes.
Define more than mixed. Because a lot of people reads that as can't even be worn together.
Well, I think the phrase is woven
Right.
or combined.
Yeah, it says woven together. Most
And so there's
nowadays,
two places. What is worn, what is
Worn
not.
together.
Priestly garments are woven together, I think what the text says, as is the curtain, the parochet in front of the Holy of Holies is also of the same material. So it's,
You do it when God commands you to do it.
but otherwise not. And so I don't think that this is a prohibition for wearing a cotton rayon mixture or cotton wool mixture. You could argue that a cotton, or a cotton linen mixture, I guess. I don't know that I've seen a cotton wool mixture. Maybe there are out there. That would be if it were a prohibition based on animal and plant, that would prohibit that. But it wasn't really specific then because there was limited availability of things to mix together.
But also generally, just I prefer like wearing one or the other because it just feels so much better. It's easier to regulate temperature if you know which if you're only wearing one.
Well, there are theories that talk about like the wavelength of clothing, things like that. And I'm not sure if that's accurate or not, but people that advocate for that would say that wool by itself is great, linen by itself is great. If you mix those together, they're not great.
Interferes with each other's signal.
Just makes them less comfortable.
Her search says, grapes don't just get along with herbs and flowers. They do well planted under elm or mulberry trees and coexist peacefully. Note, just as people don't always get along, such is the case with grapes. Grapes should never be planted near cabbage or radishes.
They don't get along with herbs or flowers. They don't like them.
let me see.
These grapes don't just get along.
They do that. They imply that.
Grapes are racist.
Grapes are picky.
And cause climate change.
Most every plant is picky.
We're gonna page ahead a bit.
Yeah, I love wearing my 100% wool sweater in the winter over my cotton shirt.
Well, one of the, I know here it is. It says, well, let's go back. I think I skipped over. Hey, it's not listed from here. Yeah, the command on Tzitzis is taken from the Midbar in Numbers 15, not from here. But here it says in chapter 22, verse 12, twisted threads you shall make for yourselves on the four corners of your garment. And it said the commentary. It says you shall make twisted. Use of the word or twisted threads, gedolim, to make for yourselves, and to link our verse with the prohibition against wearing garments made of a combination of wool and linen of the preceding verse, as if to say, you should not wear combined fibers, wool and linen together, but twisted threads you may make for yourselves of this combination. In other words, if you have a linen garment, you would make wool. The thread for the gedolim comes from wool.
I also do know that they are prepared differently before you can work with them. Wool you can work with straight away. Linen, you need to make it ferment a little bit before working with it.
Wool definitely needs to be cleaned first because there's a lot of animal sweat, grease, whatever the term is. The wool, because wool will not take a dye if it hasn't been thoroughly cleaned first.
Yeah.
And if you're going to be dyeing your tzitzits with techelet, then you have to make sure that it's thoroughly clean. But you're right. It is different, different technique for doing that.
Also, I think they're different thicknesses.
Probably. I've not really worked. I mean, with linen, I have some linen clothes, but I've never really worked to get trying to get it as I have with some wool. 23 verse either 3 or 2, depending on your translation. A mamzer shall not enter into the assembly of the Almighty. What is a mamzer? Most translations, well, I'll say that many translations don't render this passage correctly either in terms of, and I've seen a lot of newer translations, at least Jewish or Messianic translation, leave it as, untranslated. And this article translation here also says, just leaves it as mamzer.
That'd be a bastard.
That is one translation of it, but it is, the word doesn't necessarily mean someone of illegitimate birth. It is someone who is the product of a relationship that can never be tov.
Non-condoned.
Yeah. For example, a one who is example would be a child of incest would be one way to look at that. But what about an Ammonite or Moabite may not enter the assembly of the Almighty? There's a couple things to look at that. Would say, first of all, it's often brought, well, what about Ruth? She was a Moabite, and her grandson was David, so how could that work? Well, two ways of answering that. First of all, when we look at the text, and this is a case where it is definitely true that the mitzvah is very specific, whereas a lot of translations are not. The translation typically, an Ammonite or Moabite will not enter the congregation, but looking at it in terms of what the text specifically says from the Hebrew grammar, it is an Ammonite or Moabite man or male may not enter the congregation. So Ruth would not have been excluded based on this verse. But I would argue that when Ruth said, your Elohim is my Elohim and your people are my people, she essentially converted to being an Israelite. And so she was not an Ammonite, or not rather a Moabitess when she, after that point, she was considered part of Israel. And so that wouldn't apply on that account either, in my view. (23, 15, or 16) would say, I don't think that it specifically has the words land of Israel in the text of those two mitzvot on the bottom of the page, but I think that's kind of implied by basically who this is for too. So if an escaped slave seeks refuge in the land of Israel, not to return him to his master or her master. The text here about the ritual prostitution, either male or female, the text now clarifies, or at least leads us to view what it's saying: the hire of a harlot or the price of a dog. Those are terms, I think, that are related to male prostitution for the hire of the price of a dog, and female prostitution for the hire of a harlot. In chapter 23, we're told 23, 23, and 24 is something that Yeshua kind of commented on as well. It becomes more clear in the Hebrew text of Matthew, but you shall keep what emerges. Well, if you back up to verse 23 or 24, maybe, depends on your or 22, maybe, in the translation, says, when you make a vow, this reads, to Hashem your God, you shall not be late in paying it, for Hashem your God will demand it of you, and there will be sin in you. If you refrain from vowing, there will be no sin in you. You shall keep what emerges from your lips and do it just as you vowed a volunteer gift to Hashem your God, whatever you spoke with your mouth. So essentially, vows by definition are they're not mandatory. They're a vow. You voluntarily bring something up saying you're going to do, and the text says to pay your vows and to fulfill what you've uttered as vow. So a way to avoid taking a vow on something is simply just say, let your yes be yes and no be no. Do not demand from a bridegroom or any communal or military involvement.
For a year. For a year.
For a year. The bridegroom shall devote himself for 1 year to rejoice with his wife.
Year-long drinking.
Might mean you have to save up a lot of shekels in order to afford to spend all the time. do not take a pledge from a debtor by force. That passage is talking about not going in to get the pledge, but to let the person bring it out to you. It's really customary in the United States to not pay wages on the day they were earned, but that is what the Torah actually says here.
That's what I always try to do when I own my shop. My guys were paid daily.
Well,
I didn't mean, I'm not trying to hold myself up.
no, I'm saying that's a way to fulfill the mitzvah is to do exactly what you said. How do they like that or react to that? Do they think it was good?
Extra paperwork and bookkeeping.
In some ways, perhaps more takes more restraint on their part to save the money they get to pay the rent.
They had the budget.
Yeah.
Because budget was forced upon them by saying, no, you don't get paid until the next week. And there again, when they were tight in trouble, they knew the next day they were going to have some more money.
So this is one of the questions we answered during the fun challenge. 40 lashes is the most you can give. Because I guess you could inflict more damage, like with cat o' nine tails, like that. You know, you can inflict more damage with only one whip. Only hit him 40 times, but there is 10 ropes.
Very only 10 times. I'm a good guy.
Do not muzzle an ox or other animals in its train. Paul referred to that passage as well. Several mitzvot discussing the Torah of Chalitza, and that is is removed, or in other words, to not fulfill levirate marriage. And this passage is talking about equal weights and measures. We had some questions on that also. And I think that can be applied more than just to how you weigh things in a shop. You know, for example, what is it meant by an equal weight and measure? What is that about? Well, it's
Dealing honestly.
dealing honestly. Yeah, and the weight would be, you know, you're not using, you know, someone gives you gold and you put a weight, like a heavy weight on there, so it's put more gold to balance it out. Whereas when you're giving something to him in exchange for that gold, you put a lightweight on there so that your amount makes it easier to put on, make it light.
Or the whole term of putting your thumb on the scale.
Yeah, that's what it's called. Yeah. Change that. Okay. So there's the Torah of the beautiful captive. We're done with the mitzvah listing themselves and kind of getting into this. Remember the discussion about this. It is not about taking women as sex slaves, but to marry them after a time of mourning has completed.
Actual commitment.
Commitment, yeah.
Yeah.
Why is it permitted for Israelites to marry captives? According to Talmud, Torah spoke only with reference to the human desire to do evil, Yetzer Hara. It is better for the Israelites to eat meat of beasts about to die, but properly slaughtered, than the meat of the dying animals to have perished in their own without slaughter. And so, how is it related to marrying captives? If you desire her, treat her as a wife, not as a prostitute. The signs of her captivity and her prison clothes be removed. She shall dwell in your house as your wife, not dwelling as a prostitute or a rape victim in the captor's camp. That makes sense to me. Get it now?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Shua Tov.
But there's also the fact that like other nations would treat them as would treat the captives as property. Would just immediately marry them and not give them any time to mourn.
No, right. Just take them physically. The Torah of the Wayward Son. Bye. Shua Tov. We've asked this question before, but according to the sages of Israel, how often was this carried out? The stoning of the rebellious son.
Maybe it was.
Well,
We're not even told.
the question I have isn't how often it was carried out, but according to the sages of Israel, how often was it carried out?
You know,
Well, we know, never, according to the sages of Israel.
they might not know either. Might just be saying that so they don't have to do it.
But we do know that it was, in a way, carried out at least once. Because this was what was applied to Yeshua.
But he wasn't a drunkard.
But he was executed. So you can say that it was carried out, but wrongly. So the phraseology you see from Devarim is a glutton and a drunkard, Zolel v'Soveh. When you get into, this is the same phraseology is used in the English translation here of Luke. In the parallel passage in Matthew, in the Dutele and the Shinto both, there's a slight variant in the spelling, but it's still Zolel v'Soveh. There's extra vav in the Soveh in the more modern Hebrew text there, so to speak. Modern as in first century. And so if the same phraseology is used at the time of Yeshua's ministry, then it seems that he was being essentially charging him with being a glutton and a drunkard. We've talked about this before, but according to the Pharisees, what might be considered gluttony? Yeshua said he came eating and drinking, but a glutton to a Pharisee meant you didn't fast twice a week, or you didn't, because their standard was fasting twice a week. If you didn't do that, you would be considered to be a glutton, at least by the Pharisees of the day. Now, Yeshua wasn't stoned, as the passage says, to do here, but the passage immediately following that, talking about execution on a tree, is the manner that he was executed. He was hung, nailed to a tree. And so we see in the book of Galatians, even kind of talked about this, references this passage of cursed is everyone who hangs upon a tree, but his body had to be buried by nightfall as a result of this passage. In other words, the passage about being a curse, he became a curse to people to cleanse them from their disobedience, as Galatians, Paul's letter to Galatians indicates. Talked a little bit about, we talked about the mitzvot on the men's and women's clothing. I apologize for the tinyness of the text there. It's taken quotations from Rashi's commentary. Man's attire shall not be on a woman, making her appear like a man, thereby enabling her to go among men, for this can only be for the purpose of adultery, or is sexual sin. Nor may a man wear a woman's garment to go and abide among women. Another explanation, in addition to not wearing a woman's garment, a man must not also remove his pubic hair or the hair of his armpits. Again, I think that's a bit adding to this.
Yeah. You broke the Torah right there.
By adding to it.
Mm-hmm.
The Torah forbids only the wearing of clothes that would lead to abomination or moral and illicit behavior. We actually talked about that when we were reading the mitzvah.
Or saying basically when you're doing it to deceive.
Yeah. Interestingly, I think there's some mistranslation in this passage too. The author would say that the person becomes an abomination for wearing that, but it really seems to be focused on the active verb of doing it.
You're doing an abominable
You're
thing.
doing an abominable thing. You're not an
Which may have a
abomination.
penalty.
Hmm?
Which may come with a penalty.
Yes, I agree with that. So we've talked about this being the least commandment. Talked about mixing. We're reading in the mitzvot. So the verse 10, I'll go back to verse 10 for a second. Verse 10 is to not plow with an ox or a donkey together. And that's exactly what Paul references in 2 Corinthians chapter 6. So if he's making reference to it as being true, when he wrote, it means that he considered it still to be active then when he was writing. Otherwise, if he was thinking that these old commands have been abolished, then he couldn't really reference it with a straight face, I would think.
I don't know, I've heard a lot of people, I think, go too far on, they'll use mixing as an overall term for mixing anything is wrong. When it's very specific when it talks about it.
Yeah.
That just mean anything you mix is wrong.
Well, there are different words, I think, that are for mixing, in a sense. Shotness is one, but the roots for like erva or erev are also rooted in mixing or transitional space. Like erev Shabbat is transition from the week to the night before Shabbat, or the night of Shabbat. But it's still a kind of mixing of night and day in that sense. I agree that you can definitely go beyond, you know, well, I think that if you add the phrase an unholy mixture, that might make it right, but you're still, is it like the mixing of the crop, be really a kadash mixture? Um, this passage doesn't use the term tzitzit, but it's the term gedolim, twisted threads. You shall not make twisted threads, and there's a word there for clothing there. Kasut is the word for clothing. The cover yourself is what clothing does, right? It's the same. Kasut and kasutka is the word used when it says to cover yourself, but the word for clothing is kasut. So it's, or kasa in this case, kexa. It's cover yourself, but you can see it's the same root word as kasut as that. So it's like clothing with which you clothe yourself would be a better way of or your garment where you're garmenting yourself. You're covering for your cover yourself, so to speak. It's the same root words. A cloak or a mantle could be a poor man's clothing. If he takes to himself another woman, he may not reduce her food, her clothing, or her conjugal rights, and were their kasut. If you ever take to your neighbor's cloak as a pledge, you are to return it, for that is his only covering. Same word is kasut. Kasut is used in parallel with lebush, because it's the same word used as clothing in Job, and a couple times there. Covering and clothing, same words there. There's a parallel usage here of garment or clothing, kasut, with covering yourself, kasa, and I clothe labash, the heavens with blackness, and make sackcloth their kasut. So clothing and kasut are labash and kasut are in parallel. Talked a little about this in the past, but the word gedolim is translated as meshwork in 1 Kings chapter 7. And so that may indicate what is meant by the way to make your tzitzit, but as you know, there is a specific pattern specified in Torah as to how to walk that out. And as a result, there are numerous ways shown on the slide anyway, numerous ways that have been used for making tzitziot over time. And in this passage, this depiction on the screen are depictions showing wreaths of chainwork on Solomon's columns. And the idea behind that is that is the the same word used as chainwork or gedolim as done there. So there are some that are similar to that pattern, although again, there's not a specific way listed or directive of how to tie the tzitziot. So here's a question. No one is who is emasculated or has his male organ cut off shall enter the assembly of the Lord. That's what New American Standard reads. At the time Moshe wrote this, what did entering the assembly mean, and to whom did it apply? Well, my answer to this is that at the time Moshe wrote this, entering the assembly could mean anything, but if the assembly of Yah could only mean one thing. Entering the assembly could mean, which layer you're entering into in terms of the camps of Israel, but this is more, I think, specific to the Mishkan or the tabernacle. So the meaning is, it doesn't correspond to local congregations or synagogues, as you couldn't enter in, but only to the workings of the tabernacle or later the temple. So the practical application for today, like many other things associated with worship in the first the tabernacle period and the temple periods, there's not an impact until the rededication of the altar and restitution of the temple service occurs, which is prophesied to be a future event. And interestingly, to whom does it apply? Well, if you read in Yeshayahu 56, it's kind of clarified, because it kind of talks about someone with that issue entering into the assembly as part of a messianic prophecy. So we talked about misinterpretation of a mamzer. That's why many translations leave it untranslated. Most translate it as illegitimate, born out of wedlock, but it's basically based on a prohibited relationship, one that could never be considered to be valid. Not Muslim, the ox is directly applied as well from Paul. Applied that in 1 Timothy 5 as well as 1 Corinthians 9. So if he's applying it to himself as being he should, worthy of your hire and don't mow the ox while it's threshing, as something that is useful in his day, what's changed between his day and now? Really nothing. And so the point is that Paul thought it was valid, so the Torah is still valid. He was using Torah to prove his points. Equal weights and measures. We've talked about this as well, but I think this is one of the things that we really need to, I don't know if some dwell on, but I think that some applications for this now could be in terms of breed, favoritism, or textual issues, not just from a shopkeeper's perspective. But textual issues would mean something like if you're trying to be sneaky because you know a language more than you think that someone else does. You use a particular translation to prove your point, or try and use an application from a specific verse to prove your point. But if you're not telling the whole story, in other words, that there are passages that clarify what you're saying, and you only want to use this one, either a particular word that says something you really like, or not to put your thumb on the scale, so to speak.
Using the art of deception.
And using your knowledge to make a point that you know yourself is refuted by other passages, but your audience doesn't know that. That brings us to the end of my slides. Dixie wants to know why it's so hot outside.
I think she's saying, I don't care how hot it is outside, just so I'm cool in here.
I have my baby, and I'll chew on it. Leave me alone. questions or comments you want to bring out, Jim?
I don't know, but I think I brought it all out during your discussion.
All right, well, let's close then. Thank you for allowing us to midrash on your word. Thank you for the freedom you've given us to do that. We thank you in Yeshua's name. Amen.